Hello and welcome back to Comics Over Time. This season, which we're calling Murdock and Marvel, a history of Marvel Comics starring Daredevil, we're breaking down the year in the comic book industry in two parts. In part one, we'll look at the state of the comic book industry as a whole, as well as what things were going on in society that may have impacted the comic book industry during that year. We'll talk big picture about what's going on at DC and independent comics, then we'll shift our focus to Marvel. We'll look at who is creating comics, what new characters or storylines were introduced, and which comics debuted or ended. In part 2, we'll dive deep into Marvel's longest-running characters, Matt Murdock. We'll look at what the year had in store for the Man Without Fear, key things that happened, and who joined or left his world before spotlighting one key issue or story. From there, we'll wrap up the year's discussion with a takeaway before moving on to another year and a whole new discussion. We're excited to have you join us on a trip through comic book history. We are back with the second half of our discussion of 1996. My name is Duane, and with me, as always, my good buddy Dan. Dan, how's it going? We got Daredevil to talk about today.
We do. Lots and lots of Daredevil. It's an interesting year.
With everything that's going on at the company, everything in the industry as a whole, it was interesting to see what sort of year Daredevil would have, and by all accounts, you mentioned it actually last week that Daredevil's one of the few titles that actually survived sort of the massacre of series getting canceled. Him and the Hulk, probably the two biggest ones. Doesn't mean he's not isn't completely immune. There's definitely some creative turnover there this year, but by and large, the stories this year were pretty solid, I thought.
Yep. We don't want to go crowing too much because it's future us would be feeling a little ashamed if we were like, yeah, Daredevil doesn't get canceled. We're too good for that. So
no, I know that there's around the corner that there is an end to this run, but at least for this year, he is one of the surviving few. Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely.
All right, should we jump in and talk about the year for Daredevil?
Sounds awesome.
The year in Daredevil.
All right, Duane. So, why don't you start us off by getting us a little bit of an idea of where all Daredevil's been this year, what he's been up to, and then we can take a look, hopefully, at what's up in the main run.
Yeah, so Daredevil, his main run continues on like it always has, 348 to 359 this year, so well up above the 300 mark. This is where some of those other titles ended up ending their run. But beyond that, despite the fact the number of series are down, and that didn't mean Matt Murdock didn't show up in a whole bunch of other places throughout the Marvel Universe. Punisher number 4, What If 83, the Marvel vs. DC books that you talked about, issues 2 and 3, Green Goblin, issues 6 and 12, Doom 2099, issues 40 to 42. You have Over the Edge, issues 6 and 10, Wolverine 103, 104, New Warriors 73. It's amazing to me how many of these books that we talk about he appeared in ended up getting axed this year as well.
Yes.
I just now noticing this as I'm going through this. Spider-Man Unlimited 13, Essential Wolverine number 1, Essential X-Men number 1, Spider-Man 74, the Elektra Megazine issues 1 and 2, Essential Spider-Man number 1, The Age of Innocence, the Rebirth of Iron Man, Spider-Man's Greatest Team-Ups, and Elektra Lives Again graphic novels. So he appeared in a whole bunch of spots outside of that main Daredevil run this year, as has been the case pretty much for the last decade or so.
Yep. And a lot of those are reprint books and stuff like that too. So there were some of them that are going to be, like the Elektra one is a reprint from 1990 and stuff like that. But still, keeps his name up in lights. So
it's interesting when we look at the creative team for the main Daredevil run. We actually had 5 different writers this year. J.M. DeMatteis starts the year 348 to 350. We have John Rosum, issue 351. Ben Rabb, 352. Carl Kessel, 353 to 357. And then Joe Kelly on to end the year. We had Carrie Nord with 2 different stints right at the beginning of the year, 348, 349, and then towards the end of the year, 353 to 357. Ron Wagner, 350. Sean McManus, 351, 352. Pasquale Ferry with 358, and then Nord, along with Larry Hama, finished the year at 359.
Yeah. So, and the weird thing is, you've noted all the main writers and pencilers, but like Steve Epting does a few pages of some of them. Rick Leonardi does a few pages, like in the middle. It's like one of them does pages 1 to 10 and 15 to 21, and then pages 11 to 16 or something like that are done by a guest artist. It's just one of those indications that everything's a mess in terms of timing going on right now. You know?
I had not even noticed that. That is crazy. One of the things I did note is we had the return of somebody that we haven't seen in a while on inks. We had Al Williamson rejoin the book for an issue 349 on
Yep.
inks, and I was excited to see that actually.
Yep. It's always good. It's always good to see the old pros come back and hang out for a while. So, yeah, like 354, Rick Leonardi does pages 10 through 14 and 31. I don't know why.
That is crazy.
And Christy Shield is the colorist on these, but they note something called Malibu, like Malibu, maybe the company that they took over for the color separations. And I think that's actually one of the big reasons Marvel obtained Malibu was because they had such tremendous sort of color patents and processes down. So their books looked so good. And so when Marvel kind of grabbed Malibu, they then started using them to up their color game as well. So they canceled all the books, but they kept the colorists.
Yeah. You should note Bill Reinhold, Sean McManus, Matt Ryan, and Pasquale Ferry were the other inkers that got major ink credits throughout this year as well. So, bunch of writers, bunch of pencilists, bunch of inkers, and I will say, despite the creative team and the potential that there could be some really crazy things and stuff kind of just sort of happening and then just sort of being left alone, they did a pretty good job of keeping a straight line throughout this year.
They did a really good job.
Yeah,
I would agree.
It definitely could have gone off the rails quite significantly, but it did not. But let's talk about what happened this year. So the year begins with Matt Murdock trying to reconcile his recent identity crisis. If you recall, last year he was actually dressing as 2 different Daredevils, the all red version as well as the old red with the yellow version. And he didn't realize he was dressing as the other Daredevil in that. So he's trying to come to grips with what's just happened, while Foggy is angry about the secret that he has finally learned after almost 350 issues. It took Karen, what, like about 100 or so, I want to say?
Something like that, yeah. And then really, Foggy kind of has learned the secret at times, but then there's always some, I guess it really wasn't him. So he shouldn't be this angry about this. And I still would say, like I was saying a couple weeks ago, there's panels where Matt will jump into a car with Elektra or something like that and do something that nobody who didn't know where the car was and exactly the receipt was should ever have been able to do. And Foggy's standing right there.
Yeah.
How does he not know this? You know,
Just
I
never.
think Matt's a jerk for not telling his best friend, but his best friend is also a dolt for not having figured this out by now. You know,
Very, very true, probably.
that's
So,
yeah.
as Matt's trying to figure out things, he tries visiting his mother Maggie, but is actually his old mentor Stick, who I thought was dead actually, and is, for all intents and purposes, I think this was more of a hallucination, I think, of anything that actually ends up helping him. And he, through that process, he ends up taking on the Chaste as part of this, and is fighting his mentor. He's fighting other members of the Chaste, and all this, and thinks he sees Elektra, and it's a whole big complicated mess. But out of it, he sort of arrives at kind of a, okay, this is who I am again, and everything is okay, and I'm not going to have a breakdown and have me running out as multiple versions of Daredevil anymore, presumably.
Yep. He Stick is always sort of in the shadows, and he seems kind of like he just wisps away. But I think when we do see at the end of one of the books, after he kind of gets his sanity back, Matt swings away, and then you see Stick drop down onto the like the roof of the building. I believe he was actually there.
You think he was actually there? Okay.
There were parts of it that were a hallucination, but I think there were also parts where Stick actually did make an appearance. Because he's never really dead.
Okay.
You could stick like 1,000 forks in that guy, and he would be back. So
There we go. From there, Foggy and Matt begin practicing law together again. Things return to normal, or at least as normal as they can be for Daredevil and Matt Murdock. He takes out Agent Vice, who's extorting money from other criminals. He also takes on Mastermind, who also happens to be one of Matt Murdock's clients in the story as well. So we've seen this before, I think, and it actually isn't the last time we see Matt Murdock going up against somebody, and then also sort of kind of representing him as a lawyer as well.
nope. Happens all the time, it seems.
Yeah. So in June, we get a new creative team that was teased at the end of issue 352. Carl Kessel and Carrie Nord. We also get a reimagined Mr. Hyde credited to John Romita Jr. Hyde in this book is totally unhinged and equally terrifying looking. He is absolutely just horrific looking, and I don't know a better way of describing it. He is like a horror villain sort of look to him in this, and very terrifying stuff. Daredevil confronts Hyde in an old Osborne warehouse where a woman has been murdered. Hyde continues to act crazy while there and is ultimately arrested and charged with the murder of this woman. And so you're like, okay, well, this is an interesting setup. And you're not quite sure where it goes. But we're also, at the same time, we have this kind of secondary story going on in the issue where Foggy and Matt, well, mostly Matt, are asked to partner with a new hotshot lawyer, Rosalind Razor Sharp. Sharp tells Matt privately that the two are a package deal. Foggy wants to join, and if Matt doesn't join, she doesn't want Foggy at all. Foggy seems weirdly eager to join Rosalind Sharp, so Matt ultimately accepts, and we get Sharp, Nelson, and Murdock going forward.
Yeah. Doesn't seem like an equal partnership, actually.
No, no, it doesn't. She definitely seems like she's like a senior partner to their junior partners, and Nelson maybe junior partner.
Yep. Well, she's older than them as well.
Yes.
She's probably old enough that she could be one of their mothers almost. I think so.
Funny you should mention that.
Just as an age reference. I'm
Yes.
not implying anything,
No,
but
no. Tune in 1997, I guess. As for the first case under the new partnership for Matt Murdock, Sharp has Matt Murdock represent Mr. Hyde. At first, Murdock doesn't want to do it, but after meeting with Hyde, Matt doesn't think he actually killed the girl. This leads to Daredevil taking on Pyro and looking for clues at the warehouse with the help of Misty Knight and
mm-hmm.
her detective agency sort of thing that she's doing. Ultimately, this leads to a secret tunnel and a group of criminals called the Enforcers and their newest member, the Eel, who captures our hero. And the story ends with Daredevil escaping the cat and capturing the Eel and presenting the Eel to the courtroom, awaiting for him to arrive so that the trial for Mr. Hyde could actually start. And you got Foggy there. He's stalling, sweating bullets. Rosalind Sharp's upset because he's nowhere to be found and all this sort of thing. And it was quite something, to be perfectly honest.
Oh. So what did you think of these issues? What did you think of the Hyde story?
I actually kind of liked the Hyde story. It was I loved the reintroduction of Mr. Hyde. Think the character is an entirely more interesting and terrifying character, presumably going forward now as a result of this. I liked the introduction and use of Misty Knight in these stories. That this ends up being like about a 4 or 5 book story arc through the
Yep.
middle of the year, and it I really liked it. I don't know what to make of Rosalind Sharp yet, but as you point out, there definitely seems to be something more to it than just I want to be a partner.
What I think I loved about these, and I really did enjoy these books, was that Daredevil for a long time was kind of Spider-Man-ish. He was a character that hopped around the city and he did the wisecracks, and he was a hero who, he really never did have the Batman sort of constantly wanting to avenge his father, because he avenged his father like the first day he was Daredevil, right?
Yeah.
And so then he's just like, I want to help people, and he always kind of was somebody who had fun on the job, sort of. And he's having a lot of fun on the job in these books. This is a 100%, like a 180-degree turn from what we were getting in the last 3 or 4 years of Daredevil, where everything was dark and everything was very psychological and dealing so much with his guilt and dealing so much with the pain of choices he'd made in the past. And that's starting with basically Miller, and then going through into all of the writers who came afterwards. Everybody just kind of delved into that same sort of stuff. And it's almost like they just pulled off the bandage and they said, okay, well, he goes through this whole thing, he forgives himself, he accepts all the parts of himself, he goes off, kisses the girl, takes back his job, and starts cracking jokes while he's beating up bad guys. And it's like, this is not even the same character that we had, 4 years ago, 3 years ago.
It's a very sort of light-hearted version of the character we've had, and very, dare I say, fun character throughout these books.
I would dare you to. I think you can dare, because it was fun to
Yes.
actually read these books, and it was good to see him catching a break for a while. It's not going to last because it's Daredevil. Something's going to happen,
Sure,
but it's
sure,
nice
sure,
to
sure.
see him. It's kind of the same way I felt with Moon Knight sometimes. You've got a character who's just always got so many things going wrong that just once in a while, like we had in the Jed McKay run for a little while, there were a couple times where it was like, this is nice.
Things are okay. Yeah,
Yep,
I'm in it. I'm in a good place. Things are going solidly okay. I can breathe. Yeah.
I mean, if we're reading these and Daredevil's our friend, Matt's our friend, we want good things for him once in a while. And, it would be boring if it was like this all the time. But it's nice to see him get a break.
So the year ends with two standalone stories that have a much different look and feel from the rest of the year. In the first, Daredevil takes on Mysterio, who is working on a superhero insurance scam. So this is a fun story that's going to be our spotlight story this week that I do not want to spoil for you, so we will hold off on talking more about that. In the second, we see a night of Daredevil fighting crime while Karen Page talks to people of New York about their thoughts on Daredevil now that the Fantastic Four and the Avengers are gone because of that Onslaught saga that happened and disappeared many of the large Marvel heroes throughout the universe. During her late night radio call in show, she is Paige Angel. She's on WFSK, Wilson Fisk's old radio station, and she is talking to people as a late night talk show host, which we knew she had a job. It was kind of hinted at. We didn't know what it was she was doing exactly. She was doing it overnights, and we were hinted about it throughout the year, but we finally see it here specifically, that kind of narrates seeing what Daredevil's doing throughout the year, and then Daredevil actually calls into the radio show at the end of the issue.
Yeah, and she'd been doing like adult films and all of this other stuff. So when she's working late at night and doesn't want to tell him, I think it's implied that somehow she's like fallen back into pornography or something. But no, it's worse. She's a radio talk show host. So
is that worse?
I think so. I think so.
I don't know.
I'm gonna say yes.
We'll agree to disagree. I think there probably. I actually like the fact that this is what Karen Page is doing now, and I think I think this was a really fun and interesting way to tell the story. We've seen this sort of thing before. I'm not going to say it's groundbreaking or anything by that stretch of the imagination, but I just liked it, and especially given the fact that this crossover event that basically disappeared all the big heroes in the Marvel universe. What she's talking to these people about is, are the likes of somebody like Daredevil, are those going to be enough to keep New York from falling to a bunch of evil villains now that, there's not the Avengers, there's not the Fantastic Four to save them. And I just,
what happens next time Galactus comes around and Daredevil's the one that has to save us? Yeah.
Yes. That's probably going to be a bit much, but when it's absorbing man, I think it's okay. That might be okay. But I like the story. I like the narrative, and she actually recounts a story of being, I think, saved by Daredevil throughout this, and she's trying to keep an upbeat and positive thing that hey, Daredevil is our Hell's Kitchen hero, and he can do, he's willing to do it, he'll do it, and all this sort of thing. And then, like I said, then Daredevil calls in as Matt, and says how much he likes the show, basically.
I will say that if you like, say, the Jed McKay run on Moon Knight that's been going the last couple of years, I think this is the closest to that feel we've had in Daredevil in probably the entire time we've been reading them. It's there's some seriousness, there's character beats, and obviously there's still some things to be ironed out between the various characters and everything. But overall, it's just one of those where it is like Daredevil has been just under this pall for so long. It's almost a metaphor for comics themselves, that you've got all of these heroes who've just been in this dark space for all of the 90s, and then suddenly he's just free. And yeah, I liked it. But yeah, the art in 358 is fantastic. I just think that they did a beautiful job. So it's interesting too because it's Larry Hama on layouts. The guy, of course, is famous for writing G.I. Joe and that sort of stuff. And then Nord did the pencils over that. So it's a joint effort, but I think it really worked out well.
Yeah, so I mean that's the year for Daredevil in the main run, and like I said, we don't know where this. It seems like things are going to just kind of go from here, and obviously with the bankruptcy and stuff, you're not quite sure what's going to happen. But it seems like as the year ends, it's like this is actually a really good spot for Daredevil, and I'm really excited to see what 1997 is going to be like. If this is what 96 was like.
Yep.
This week's Spotlight Story.
Daredevil, number 358, November 1996. It's called Aftermath. What is it about this story that makes it your choice for the book of 1996 for Daredevil?
First and foremost, I have to say that I love the idea of an insurance scam, and I like and maybe I should explain the story first before we talk more specifically about it.
Not but just a generic insurance scam.
Yeah, no, this is a unique insurance scam based on the Marvel Universe. So, as the story begins, Foggy Nelson is being approached by a Mr. Peabody who is setting up an insurance company to sell superhero insurance. This is to cover damage caused by superheroes, and he wants to be represented by Sharp, Nelson, and Murdock. Mr. Peabody invites Foggy and his partners to a fancy gala to discuss the deal in more detail. Meanwhile, we have Rosalind Sharp wanting Matt to look into the foreclosure status of the Four Freedoms Plaza now that the Fantastic Four are dead. Matt initially refuses, but Sharp hangs the prospect of firing Foggy over his head, and he immediately reconsiders. On the way to Avengers Mansion to talk to Black Widow, which is he just decides, instead of going and doing the thing I'm supposed to do, I'm going to go check on Black Widow because she didn't disappear with the rest of the Avengers when they disappeared because of Onslaught. He is attacked by the illusion of a juggernaut, but then that battle quickly ends. When he arrives at the Avengers Mansion, Daredevil finds only Jarvis there, who strongly implies that the heroes will be returning, but they're just not there now. To which then Daredevil leaves, and Natasha's obviously not there either. So it was basically just 2 pages of Daredevil talking to Jarvis.
And I think Jarvis didn't really... It's not like he knew something that everybody else didn't. He just believes in them. He's like,
yes.
I'm just...
Yes.
They're going to be back. They always make it back. I'm just going to make sure everything's ready for them. And I'm not accepting any other answer than eventually they'll all wander back through the door.
Yeah. Yeah, that is true. It's not hinting as so much as I guess I hope, but it turns out that
no, he's not in on anything. It's just that's the kind of guy he is. He's going to keep the lights on.
Right. So that night at the gala, Onslaught attacks, except like the Juggernaut encounter earlier in the day, something isn't right, and we learn that it is in fact Mysterio instead, or at least some robots that are controlled by Mysterios, as they are seen blowing up as part of this kind of pseudo battle. As for Mr. Peabody, he was at the gala disguising himself as Liz Osborne, Foggy Nelson's date. And he's done such a good job that Foggy just has professed his love to her as part of all this. Daredevil realizes this, walks up and punches Liz right in front of a stunned Foggy before revealing Peabody and his involvement with Mysterio in this superhero insurance scam. As the story ends, Foggy and the real Liz kiss. Meanwhile, Matt goes home and finds an angry Karen Page who thinks that Matt is trying to rekindle his romance with the Black Widow because his trip to the Avengers compound was caught on camera. So, yeah. Even when things are good, there ends up being something that Matt does to screw it up, and then things aren't going quite so good by the time this ends.
Yeah. Yeah, they're always contentious, those two. The whole Liz Allen, Liz Osborne thing, that was a little weird, and the like he's a man from Foggy when the punch comes through and everything. It was very strange. I don't know exactly how this fit in with everything else, other than they just needed probably a standalone story because it's written by completely different people and everything. But it's kind of cool because it's still connected.
Yes.
And that's the thing that I'm impressed with, is with all the stuff going on, Daredevil, at least this year, with the onslaught all happening and everything, they managed to reference it in the books.
Yeah.
They managed to have essentially a guest issue that tells a different story, but it still all keeps all the main threads of what's going on. It's more organized than I think we've seen a lot of times. And
yeah,
so that's maybe definitely a credit to Bob Harris. Who knows?
Yeah.
But it works.
So the superhero insurance scheme. I love this. It's you're buying insurance to protect you against damage that is caused by superheroes. In essence, hey, every time the Avengers do something to save New York, they tend to cause a lot of damage in the process. So here, pay a monthly premium and we'll pay to fix whatever it is they break of yours when, inevitably whenever it ends up happening. And so I'm actually surprised that this story has not happened sooner. And maybe it has for other heroes or something, but just the idea of, there's talk at the beginning of the issue and they're like, who's responsible or who deals with it when things get broken because the Avengers save New York, and it's like damage control. And it's just like, and it to the point, it's like, yeah, who does? I mean, I think that definitely falls in line of the act of God sort of stipulations that State Farm and Allstate probably have when it comes to keeping your house or car safe.
Yeah, and I mean, damage control as an idea has been around since the 80s at Marvel, but as far as they're more like cleanup. They're not really a going to rebuild your chicken coop or whatever type of a place. So I think it's fascinating. It's also probably a good way for an insurance company to go bankrupt, because I can't imagine how they would ever pay out with the stuff that happens in the Marvel universe. So, but yeah, that was really interesting. And then that, of course, he would wander into a superhero's office when he's getting ready to do it, and all the rest. So it was pretty fascinating.
So you had that. I loved that this is how they sort of tied the events in from outside the big crossover event. This is basically if you were like me and weren't reading the rest of Marvel this year, this is how you found out what was going on. And because there was from one Daredevil title to the next, you didn't know that all this had happened, but suddenly all this happened, and you kind of find out about it because you're reading this issue. And so I thought it was really interesting. And to your point, they did a great job of sort of bringing in the fact that all this happened outside of the title, while also keeping the kind of the threads going that had been going throughout the year leading up to this point. So I really
Yep.
liked how that had worked as well.
And having like the fake onslaught in there, so you get a little bit of the actual crossover and the like. So yeah, it was well done. But again, I mean, I like the fact that even with this, they kept the focus on the characters. You know, you're moving Foggy's story forward. You're moving. I guess I don't know if you're moving Matt's story forward. He's kind of sideways in this one more than forward. But he's. I love how he's like, and I was just starting to feel good about today, because everything goes kind of crazy. But then it gets better. It gets better next issue. So.
Yeah, the Daredevil punching the woman, like if you'd have put that panel out like separate of the book, it'd have been just like the that punch of the old woman in the MCU trailer.
Yes, in Captain Marvel.
Yeah, it's just like, wow, this is not knowing the context of this is really really surprising that Daredevil is punching some random woman
That is true.
Is going on. The last thing that I think I really found interesting about this book was the look of this book. And I mentioned that the last two books looked decidedly different than anything earlier in the year, and specifically this book. So the penciler and inker for this was Pasquale Ferry.
Yep.
And the thing I will say about this, and the look of this book that I can use to best describe it as a reference, was Doonesbury. If you're familiar with the Doonesbury comic, that was what it reminded me of immediately. Am I completely off base in that?
I don't know about that. I mean, it looks very comic-y. Whoever the comic person you'd be recommended of is. Now, you wouldn't think so much of like Humberto Ramos or some of the guys that come to mind for me. But to me, it looks like something that would be sort of Art Adams crossed with Art Thibert crossed with Humberto Ramos. It's very comic-y. And especially the first few, where we see like the guy with the coffee cup sitting there in Foggy's office. Mr. Peabody and the like, it looks very much like, yes, I can see a Doonesbury going there. So, yeah, in any case, it's a very different art style. It's a very light art style. You know, there's not a lot of backgrounds for the most part. A lot of the times when there is a background, there's kind of a little joke in the background. Like some of the art, there's a statue of Iron Man in one of the galleries, and it's signed by Alicia Masters and stuff like that. Of course, Thing's girlfriend, who's a sculptor, and so there's a lot of little Easter eggs in it and the like. It's a lot of fun.
I think it was the look of the people that reminded me, and it's Gary Trudeau did Doonesbury, and I was just like,
absolutely.
When I think about what Daredevil himself and just the Daredevil comic book has looked like through 350 some odd issues before this, it has never looked like this before.
No,
this was
no.
entirely different than anything we'd ever seen before, and that to me was a bit surprising that we would have a look that was just that much different than anything else we'd ever seen to this point.
Yep. But was good, and because
no,
of the
it was
nature
definitely
of the story,
good.
It was really nice. So
yeah.
And I guess Art Thibert is actually one of the inkers, so I would bet that probably he was a big part of why that was. Ferry inked some of it himself as well, though. So yeah, that's cool. I also like the ink or the art on the last book, because you referenced the last two books. Very different, but that's almost like a film noir sort of thing, where you've got super high contrast darks and lights and everything like that, and it looks just fantastic and kind of 1940s-ish. So it's a distinct difference between the two. But
it was two issues back to back that just had this like completely new look to Daredevil than we'd ever seen before. That I liked in both regards, and definitely in different ways. They stuck out to
Cool.
me. I mean, this wasn't like this big super fantastic like story, but at the same time, it was just a story that I loved, and like this was something. When I think back going forward about the run of Daredevil, I think this is going to be just a one-off book that I'm going to remember because of its look, because of the story, and everything that happened in this. So that's why I thought it was a good spotlight book for this week.
I'm intrigued by how much I am reevaluating the later books in the Daredevil run as we get to this point, because I enjoyed last year's books with some of the stuff that they had, like the Tree of Knowledge and stuff like that. And now this here is just a breath of fresh air. That I think these are a lot of fun. They were soothing. They were also quick to read. I think that if you look at the number of words compared to the last couple of years, it was a lot less compressed storytelling as well. There were a number of double page spreads or full page images, and then just a lot less worriness than we'd had before. So
yeah, they definitely felt like you could get through them quickly. I mentioned this on social media. I started actually going in and reading The Watchmen, and each chapter is taking me about 45 minutes to an hour to get through, whereas I think I got through about like 4 or 5 issues of Daredevil this year in about the same amount of time. It just was like decidedly different. And that's not to say that these are, like I said, these aren't bad. These are good, and they're entirely different and very enjoyable.
Yeah, well, I mean, like the Tales of the Back Freighter take a long time to get through, and all of the other text sections and everything. So Watchmen is just dense. There's almost nothing you'll ever read that will take you longer in comic books than reading Watchmen, if you actually read the whole thing and read through it. So,
all right, Dan, let's move on and let's talk about the rapid fire questions for this week.
We get some answers out of you finally. You haven't been able to give me good answers to some of these for a while. I think maybe this week you'll be able to. Who is Matt Murdock in love with this year?
Well, it's Karen Page. They are seemingly living together again, though he does sort of screw it up towards the end of the year again. He goes looking for Natasha Romanoff inexplicably at Avengers Compound and gets caught on camera. Karen sees this, they get upset, and they sort of kind of reconcile in the last issue when he calls into the radio program. And so I think those two, as much as they can be together and as much as he can love one woman at a time, Matt Murdock is into Karen Page this year.
The answer to that always is himself, evidently.
Yes.
Matt Murdock loves himself. So,
probably
right.
True.
And hates himself as well. So, who's the biggest villain of the year? Who's the one that you liked most or you think was most important?
Oh, I think the eel was the story arc that was the longest of the year. It was the most interesting. You didn't know that was who it was going to be. It kind of did it painted the Mr. Hyde as the big bad at the start of the run, but then we find out very late that it is in fact the eel that was the big villain of the year and was behind the murder in the Osborne warehouse.
I was 100% sure that the eel was going to actually be revealed to be the Cobra, and that he was trying to take his vengeance.
Yeah,
I mean eels and cobras, but no.
Yeah,
it's just another. So,
I mean they redid Mr. Hyde, so why not?
No, why not? So, do we see Matt practicing law this year?
Sort of, yes. He is practicing law again. Eventually, Nelson and Murdock get back together. Early on in the year, they add a new partner, Rosalind Sharp. Like I said, she's kind of the senior partner in this group. He's, he's representing Mr. Hyde, though he, in fact, actually, he's Daredevil and drops the eel in the courtroom when he
Yep.
should have been Matt Murdock and at the lawyer.
I was gonna say, I think we did see one time where he did show up in court, like for the first part of the trial, and then he missed the rest
Yes.
of it or something. But yeah, so he's working on it. He's doing what he can. Um, who knows his identity? Anybody new, or who knows he is Matt Murdock?
So no one new this year finds out about Matt Murdock being Daredevil. We just finally see Foggy come to grips with that knowledge.
Do you
Uh,
think? Do you think not? Does does Sharp not know?
I don't think Sharp knows. No.
Because when she talks, like she's like, oh yeah, we'll have to put your office back someplace where you can get away or whatever, and the like. I don't know. Maybe not. It
No,
seems
it
like
was
she
it was
knows.
Murdoch that was suggesting him being his office being kind of back and secluded because you know he he is concerned about distraction and stuff like that and doesn't want to be
There
a
you go. All right. I still suspect her. I suspect her.
bother.
So, um, is Daredevil a good guy this year?
I think so. He's back being the guy that we've always known, and he's trying to look out for Foggy and his wishes a bit, specifically when it came to the whole Rosalind Sharp issue. He's not necessarily looking in on Karen Page when he knows that she's working somewhere and she's not
Mm-hmm.
telling him what it is. He talks about potentially tailing her, but says no, I'm not going to do that. Though he does end up figuring it out by the end of the year, and ends up calling her show. So I think he's a good guy this
The fact he has to remind himself not to stalk his not quite yet again girlfriend is probably not awesome, but we'll give him a
year.
break. I
Right.
guess it's the '90s. The Yeah, I think that this is Daredevil as hero. Like he is back to being who he needs to be. He has sort of paid that penance for his accidental sins and everything he's gone through, that whole crucible, and now he's back, just trying to do what he has to. And he's not running around with crazy tactical armor, and he's not using guns, and he's not the Punisher anymore. He is
Oh,
Daredevil. So, what about his outfit? Any changes to the costume?
no, we are back to just the all reds that we've had for a long time, and like when you think of Daredevil, this is the suit that you expect him to be in.
Isn't that though? Didn't he change back to that in the first issue of this year?
No, he
Was that
changed.
last year?
It was last year,
Okay. And then
yeah.
anything
And there,
new that we learn about his past?
right? I wouldn't say there's anything new about his past this year either.
What do you think is the biggest moment of this year?
So I'm going to be honest. I don't think there is a big moment this year. So if you look back at the year, I think the stories were interesting. They were well told. I think they looked great. But as far as anything major actually happening, and something that I can point to as being this is a moment that that really matters, I don't see it actually.
Okay. I
Is
think
there a
there's.
big moment this year for you?
I think 350 was big for him. I think
Yeah.
that was a good issue because it was when he resolved all of his problems. He goes home and sort of dedicates himself to the girl. He goes out and does some good by giving the woman who's kind of caught in that life of prostitution the $5,000 she needs to get away, And then he flies off, and Stick is just smiling at, you know, the son that he never had flying off into the distance doing good. And so I like 350. I think that was a big, I think that end of that was a big moment for him.
If there's any moment this year that could qualify, that definitely would be it. I don't know. It it felt like something we had been there before, but maybe not.
I would agree with you entirely that it's not a year that has, you know, a Frank Miller moment type of thing. You know, a thing that really sticks out necessarily that way. This is a quieter, kind of a quieter song, as it were. You know, it's not something that's necessarily got as many big notes. So, but it was good. I enjoyed this year a lot more than I thought I was gonna. I have been expecting to have to basically prop my eyeballs open with, like, you know, toothpicks on my eyelids to make it through them. And in actual fact, the last couple of years' stories have been really fun.
These have been good stories, and I think that, you know, it definitely could have been considerably worse given everything that was going on at Marvel at the time. And, you know, as we pointed out, there were a lot of creatives on these books, but they did a good job of keeping things in order and keeping things making sense and keeping the story moving, introducing a new character in Rosalind Sharp this year as well. And there's a lot to like about these books, and definitely
Absolutely.
these would be worth reading if you were a fan of Daredevil.
100% agree.
All right, with that, Dan, I think we've covered Daredevil this year, so I think all that's left to talk about with regards to 1996 is the takeaway. This week's takeaway. Okay, Dan, we've looked at comics as a whole. Things are going okay, but they're definitely not going great. We looked at Marvel. Things are definitely not going good here, and ended with the bankruptcy filing by Marvel at the end of the year. Daredevil had a surprisingly good run this year, despite a rotating list of creators that were involved in the stories. If we're looking back at this year, 1996, what is the takeaway that we should have for this year?
You know, I think I could give you one that's kind of comprehensive of all the different levels of what we've talked about. And that is to simply state that you're better off sticking at what you're good at. And that for comics, this was a year when they had 3 adaptations that went into theaters and failed horribly because the companies were trying to force things at a time when technology and the like maybe wouldn't let them do what they needed to there, and they'd have been better off if they'd have just stuck to comics and not tried to go into that. You have Marvel going in and buying up distributors and buying up card companies and all this other stuff and leveraging themselves into a bunch of debt, eventually just about wrecking themselves. Even as, in actual fact, the comic books they're making are still selling better than most other people's comic books. They've lost a lot of market share, but they're still at the top of the market share. And really, you know, I would bet that if it wasn't for all of the debt service and everything else that they were trying to hold, they would have still made money this year, even with all of the stuff going on around them. And with Daredevil, similarly, that both for Matt Murdock and for the creators, they had a good year this year, partly because they went back to basics. You know, they're like, here's our character. He's Matt Murdock, the blind lawyer who's also a superhero. Here's his friend group that he's had since 1964. How about instead of constantly screwing that up, we just go back and try the formula that, you know, Stan started back in 64 that seems to have worked for decades. And on all of these things, it seems like, you know, there has been so much overthinking and so much change and so many attempts to make Daredevil edgy or make Daredevil relevant in this way or that. But really, I think the character's key relevance is just in being who that character is, you know? And so, at least for that time. Now, things have moved on, obviously. There have been some changes again over the next few years and some permanent changes to the Daredevil status quo. But I think for this point, that Marvel really did need to step back and realize what it was that it was good at and focus on that. And Daredevil needed to do the same thing.
I think that is a great takeaway for this year. If we look at what was successful this year, it was companies and characters doing the things that they were good or known for going into this year, and that makes a lot of sense. And it's in. I'm very interested in seeing what this means for Marvel, for comics, and for Daredevil going forward, because
Yep.
it's I think that's sometimes a tough lesson that people don't necessarily want to learn and are sometimes resistant to learning it, and so it's interesting if to see if they do actually learn something from this.
Well, the market is going to teach them if they don't want to. So one way or another, the lesson will be learned. So, but this has been fun. I enjoy talking about this year. It's a rough one, but it also is a formative one in a lot of ways. The changes that were made, especially to some of those key books, and we'll look at that more next year when we actually start to see how that shakes out. Because, believe it or not, all those books are going to get killed again and reissued again next year. So it's kind of a transition period. So we'll see how that goes.
Gosh, that's going to be a whole nother discussion, but it is going to have to wait for another week because this is going to wrap it up for us for this week. We'd like to thank you all for joining us. If you're new to the podcast, please consider subscribing on your podcast player of choice. That way you'll get each new episode as soon as it's released. If you've already subscribed, we'd appreciate it if you'd share the show via social media or leave us a review. That will help other new listeners find the show that much easier. Now, whether you're new to the podcast or you've been with us from the beginning, we'd love to get your thoughts on this week's show. Maybe you read the issues that we talked about this week, the Daredevil run, around issue 350. We'd love to get your thoughts. You can send those to us via email at that address is comments at comicsovertime.com, or you can reach out to us via social media on X or Blue Sky. We are at Comics Overtime there. Dan, this was a pretty exhaustive list of discussion across these last 2 weeks. There's been a lot to talk about. My suspicion next year is that it's not going to get that much easier, is it?
No, it's going to still be a rough time for the next few years. But the nice thing is, we all know we're still buying Marvel comic books in 2024, so it can only be so bad, right? Keep the faith, folks.
Yeah, that is true. And with that, until next week, take care, everybody.
See you later, folks.